I'm Jessica Mitchell, 35, and my mother just mocked me at our family dinner for being pathetically single. Little did she know, I've been happily married for 2 years to the man she once called totally wrong for our family. As everyone laughed at her joke, I felt the weight of my secret wedding ring hanging from a chain beneath my blouse, pressing cold against my skin. What happened next changed our entire family forever. Hey everyone! Before I dive into this wild family drama, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If you enjoy real-life family revenge stories like mine, hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how karma finally caught up with my controlling mother. Now, back to that fateful dinner. My relationship with my mother, Eleanor Mitchell, had always been complicated. Growing up in our pristine suburban Connecticut home, I was the middle child between two brothers who could seemingly do no wrong. Dad was rarely home, always working to maintain the lifestyle my mother insisted we needed to keep up appearances in our affluent neighborhood. From an early age, I learned that my mother's approval was conditional on meeting her expectations. "Jessica, darling," she would say with that tight smile that never reached her eyes, "a lady must always present herself appropriately." This applied to everything: my grades, all A's, no exceptions, my extracurriculars, classical piano, not the photography I loved, my friends, only from good families, and eventually, my dating choices. By high school, I'd grown accustomed to her subtle put-downs. When I made honor roll instead of valedictorian, she sighed, "Well, I suppose that's still respectable." When I wore a dress I'd saved up for from my part-time job, she'd inspect me with narrowed eyes and say, "That's interesting. But don't you think something more classic would suit your figure better?" Her words always stung, but I'd mastered the art of the polite smile and nod. College offered my first taste of freedom. I attended NYU instead of her alma mater, choosing journalism over the business degree she wanted for me. Those 4 years were transformative. I found my voice, made genuine friends who liked me for myself, and began building a career in digital media that fulfilled me. But every holiday trip home reminded me that my choices disappointed her. Then, at 28, I met Ryan Cooper at a charity fundraiser I was covering for work. He was brilliant, kind, passionate about environmental law, and from a working-class background in Detroit. We connected instantly over shared values and a wicked sense of humor. After 3 months of dating, I finally brought him home to meet my family. The dinner was disastrous. My mother's icy politeness barely concealed her disdain. When Ryan mentioned his single mother who had worked 2 jobs to put him through college, Mom muttered something about admirable but limited circumstances. When he passionately discussed his work advocating for communities affected by environmental negligence, she dismissed it as idealistic. Later that night, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Jessica, surely you can't be serious about him," she hissed. "He's educated, I'll grant you that, but he has no connections, no family background. Think about your future children. Don't you want them to have the advantages you had?" "Mom, I love him," I said, my hands shaking as I loaded the dishwasher. "He's kind, brilliant, and he makes me happy." "Love." She laughed coldly. "Love is for romance novels. Marriages in our circle are alliances. Your father and I married sensibly, and look at the life we've built." I glanced through the doorway at my father, silently nursing his scotch while my brothers talked around him. Was that really the partnership I wanted? "Ryan is totally wrong for our family," my mother declared with finality. "If you continue this relationship, don't expect our support." For months afterward, every call home included subtle and not-so-subtle digs at Ryan. She'd send me profiles of suitable men from her friends' families. The pressure mounted until finally, after a particularly nasty argument where she threatened to cut me from her will, I made a decision that would alter the course of our family forever. I told her Ryan and I had broken up. In reality, we moved in together, building a life filled with love, respect, and honesty, everything my relationship with my mother lacked. I maintained the facade during family visits, creating a fictional single life that satisfied her. For years, I navigated holidays alone, fielding questions about my dating life with vague answers, while Ryan spent those days with his own loving, accepting mother. The deception wasn't ideal, but it preserved a fragile peace. I told myself I was protecting Ryan from my mother's toxicity. In truth, I was afraid of being disowned, afraid of conflict, afraid of becoming the family pariah. So the charade continued, year after year, as the distance between my real life and my family life grew wider. What I didn't realize then was how this double life was slowly poisoning everything it touched, and how dramatically it would all unravel in ways I never could have imagined. 2 years ago, on a perfect autumn day in a small vineyard just outside the city, I became Mrs. Jessica Cooper. Our wedding was intimate and magical, just 30 of our closest friends, Ryan's mother Diane, who had embraced me like the daughter she never had, and his extended family, who welcomed me with open arms. No Mitchells were present. The ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of, but different from the lavish society wedding my mother had always envisioned for me. Instead of an ornate ballroom filled with business associates and social climbers, we stood among sun-dappled grapevines. Instead of the designer gown my mother would have insisted on, I wore a vintage-inspired dress that made me feel both beautiful and authentic. Instead of my father walking me down the aisle to fulfill tradition, Ryan's uncle, a kind man who had been like a father to him, escorted me while Ryan's mother beamed from the front row. "You look radiant, honey," Diane had whispered as she helped adjust my veil that morning. "I'm so blessed to have you in our family." Her genuine warmth made my throat tight with emotion. This was what maternal love could be: unconditional, supportive, and kind. As we exchanged vows, I felt a mix of pure joy and lingering sadness. Ryan sensed it and squeezed my hands a little tighter. "I promise to be your shelter and your adventure," he said, his voice steady and sure. "To love the parts of you that you share with the world and the parts you felt you needed to hide. You never have to pretend with me." Tears slipped down my cheeks as I responded with my own vows, promising to cherish the honest, accepting love we'd built together. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, our small gathering erupted in genuine celebration. For the first time, I felt completely seen and accepted for who I was. Later, during our first dance, Ryan held me close and murmured, "No regrets about your family not being here." I looked around at the joyful faces surrounding us, people who loved us for exactly who we were, and felt certainty settle over me. This is perfect. This is family. After the wedding, maintaining the deception became more complicated. We bought a brownstone in Brooklyn that we lovingly renovated together, creating a home that reflected both our personalities. I wore my wedding ring on a chain around my neck, only placing it on my finger when I was safely away from anyone connected to my family. Ryan's mother came to visit often, filling our home with her warmth and the smell of her famous peach cobbler. Meanwhile, my visits to Connecticut became less frequent. I crafted elaborate stories about work commitments and travel that prevented me from attending some family functions. When I did visit, I carefully edited my conversations to exclude any mention of Ryan or our shared life. My brothers, James and Michael, remained oblivious, wrapped up in their own families and careers that perfectly aligned with our mother's expectations. Dad seemed to notice something different about me, sometimes catching my eye with a curious expression, but he never asked questions. The distance between us had grown too vast for such personal inquiries. The strangest part was how my professional life flourished during this time. I'd been promoted to senior editor at the digital magazine where I worked, overseeing human interest stories that often explored themes of authenticity and personal truth. Concepts I struggled with in my own life. I wrote an award-winning series about people living double lives due to cultural and family pressures, drawing subtle inspiration from my own experience while being careful to disguise the personal connection. Ryan supported my career wholeheartedly, attending award ceremonies and industry events as my proud husband, though we were always careful about photography and social media posts that might find their way back to my family. His own environmental law practice was gaining recognition for several landmark cases against corporate polluters. We were building successful careers and a beautiful life together, but the shadow of my family's secret loomed over everything. Don't you think it's time to tell them? Ryan asked gently on our first anniversary as we shared a quiet dinner at home. Living like this isn't sustainable, Jess. I hate seeing you tie yourself in knots every time your mother calls. You don't understand how she operates, I said, twisting my wedding ring, which I could wear freely in our home. She won't just be angry about us being together. She'll be furious about the deception. She might never speak to me again. Would that really be worse than this half-life you're living with them? Ryan asked, his eyes filled with concern rather than judgment. I had no answer for him then. But as our second anniversary approached, the strain of the deception was beginning to show. I was having trouble sleeping, jumping whenever my phone rang with my mother's specific ringtone, and experiencing anxiety attacks before family visits. What I didn't know was that fate was about to force my hand in the most unexpected and public way possible. The carefully constructed walls between my two lives were about to come crashing down, setting in motion a family reckoning that none of us could have anticipated. The Mitchell family gatherings had always been performative affairs, showcases of success and propriety rather than genuine connection. Our monthly family dinners were no exception. They followed a predictable pattern: cocktails in the formal living room, a multi-course meal prepared by my mother's part-time chef, and carefully curated conversations that highlighted achievements while glossing over anything uncomfortable. My oldest brother James, 38, had followed our father's path into investment banking. He'd married Charlotte, the daughter of one of Dad's business associates, a match my mother had practically orchestrated. They had two perfectly behaved children who attended the right private school and participated in the right extracurricular activities. James had never questioned the life mapped out for him, seeming genuinely content within its well-defined boundaries. Michael, 33, the youngest, had rebelled briefly in college with an art history phase that sent my mother into fits of anxiety about his directionless future. But he eventually capitulated, earning an MBA and joining a prestigious consulting firm. He was engaged to Isabel, a polished interior designer from a good family, who my mother adored for her social connections and impeccable taste. Dad, Gregory Mitchell, remained the enigma he'd always been, physically present but emotionally distant, retreating behind his financial newspapers and rare whiskeys. Sometimes I wondered if he even noticed the tensions and machinations playing out around him, or if he deliberately disconnected decades ago. And then there was me, the disappointment, the question mark, the daughter who had chosen an alternative career in digital media and remained stubbornly single despite my mother's best efforts at matchmaking. Or so they all believed. The dinner that would change everything was meant to celebrate Michael and Isabel's engagement. It was a warm June evening, and I'd reluctantly driven up from the city, leaving Ryan at home with a quick kiss and the promise to call him later. "Just get through tonight," he'd said, squeezing my hand. "We'll figure the rest out soon." I arrived at my parents' colonial-style house with a carefully selected engagement gift and the practiced smile I wore for family functions. Charlotte greeted me at the door with air kisses and immediate comments about my appearance. "Jessica, you look rested. New skincare routine?" "You know, my dermatologist works wonders for fine lines." At 36, she'd already started preventative Botox. "Just getting enough sleep," I replied with forced cheer. The irony, of course, was that I'd barely slept in days, anxious about this very gathering. Inside, the scene was exactly as expected, James discussing market trends with Dad while my mother fussed over Michael and Isabel, who sat entwined on the sofa, the perfect image of young love. When my mother saw me, her expression shifted from genuine pleasure to polite acknowledgement. "Jessica, darling, finally. We were about to start without you." She kissed my cheek lightly, her perfume overwhelming. "That's an interesting blouse. Very creative." I touched the silk blouse I'd chosen specifically because it concealed the chain with my wedding ring. "Thanks, Mom. The magazine did a feature on this designer last month." "How avant-garde of them." She turned back to Isabel. "Now, as I was saying about the venue options." The evening proceeded according to script: champagne toasts to the engaged couple, elaborate dinner courses, and pointed questions about everyone's accomplishments. I fielded the usual inquiries about my work with practiced vagueness. "The magazine is doing well. We just won a digital publishing award." Yes, it's fulfilling. Then, as dessert was being served, my mother turned her full attention to me, always a dangerous moment. Jessica, I ran into Diane Holbrook at the club yesterday. Her son Alexander just made partner at his law firm. Divorced last year, no children, and buying a place in Westport. I mentioned you might be free for dinner next weekend. I nearly choked on my creme brulee. Mom, I didn't agree to that. Well, you certainly aren't meeting anyone holed up in that apartment of yours in the city. When was your last serious relationship? That environment fellow, what was his name? Ryan, I said quietly, the name feeling strange to speak aloud in this house. Yes, him. That was what, 5 years ago now? And nothing serious since. I'm focused on my career, I said, my standard response. Career. My mother sighed dramatically. A career won't keep you warm at night or give you children, Jessica. You're 35. The clock is ticking rather loudly. James's wife Charlotte nodded sympathetically. It does get harder after 35. My doctor was just saying fertility drops dramatically. I'm not concerned about my fertility, Charlotte, I interrupted sharply. Well, you should be, my mother said. At this rate, your father and I will be gone before we see you settled properly. The table fell uncomfortably silent. Even Michael and Isabel stopped their whispered conversation to watch this familiar drama unfold. My mother took a delicate sip of her dessert wine and laughed lightly. No wonder you're still single at 35, darling. You've always been so particular. She patted my hand in a gesture that appeared affectionate but felt patronizing. Some women just aren't meant for partnership. Perhaps you're one of them. Something inside me cracked. Maybe it was the condescension in her voice. Maybe it was the weight of 2 years of lies. Maybe it was the stark contrast between this cold assessment of my worth and the loving partnership I went home to every night. I felt my hand rise to my blouse, fingers closing around the chain hidden beneath. For a moment, I considered pulling it out, revealing the truth in one dramatic gesture. But years of conditioning held me back. Instead, I smiled tightly and excused myself to the powder room, where I splashed cold water on my face and texted Ryan, "It's worse than usual tonight. I don't know how much longer I can do this." His reply came immediately, "Come home. We'll face whatever comes together." When I returned to the table, the conversation had moved on to wedding venue options for Michael and Isabel. I sat silently, barely touching the coffee served with dessert, feeling more disconnected from my family than ever before. What none of us knew then was that forces were already in motion that would expose my secret marriage in the most public and unexpected way. The careful separation I'd maintained between my two lives was about to collapse spectacularly, setting off a chain reaction that would reveal far more than just my hidden relationship. The thread that finally unraveled my carefully constructed double life came from the most unexpected source: my career success. 3 weeks after that tense family dinner, my magazine published an in-depth feature I'd worked on for months, an exposé on corporate environmental negligence affecting communities across the Midwest. The story centered on Ryan's most significant legal victory, though I'd been careful to maintain journalistic objectivity despite our relationship. The piece gained immediate traction, picked up by major news outlets and sparking national conversation. Within days, I was invited to discuss the investigation on a popular morning news program. It was the biggest opportunity of my career, one I couldn't refuse. "This could change everything for you professionally," Ryan said as we celebrated the news in our living room. "I'm so proud of you." "I'll have to be careful not to mention you specifically," I worried, pacing nervously. "What if someone from my family sees it?" Ryan took my hands, stopping my anxious movement. "Jess, maybe it's time. This success deserves to be celebrated fully, without shadows hanging over it." I leaned into his embrace, knowing he was right but still terrified of the potential fallout. The morning of the interview arrived with perfect early autumn weather. I wore my most professional outfit, a navy blazer over a cream silk blouse, my hair styled in loose waves. As I sat in the makeup chair at the studio, the stylist commented on the chain around my neck. "That's unique. Mind if I adjust it to sit better with the neckline?" Before I could respond, she'd already lifted the chain, revealing the wedding ring that hung from it. "Oh, how lovely. Is there a story behind wearing your wedding ring this way?" Flustered, I mumbled something about keeping jewelry minimal on camera. She smiled knowingly, but didn't press further, though I noticed one of the production assistants glancing curiously in my direction. The interview itself went beautifully. The host was engaged with the story, asking thoughtful questions about the investigation and its impact. Then, near the end, she shifted gears. Your reporting on this case has been extraordinarily detailed and compassionate, Jessica. Was there something personal that drew you to this particular environmental justice issue? It was a standard question about journalistic motivation, but in that moment, with cameras rolling and lights bright, the weight of all my compartmentalized half-truths suddenly felt unbearable. The truth is, I heard myself saying, I've seen firsthand the dedication of the legal advocates fighting for these communities. My husband is an environmental attorney who has represented similar cases. The host's eyebrows rose slightly clearly. Someone had briefed her that I was single. But she recovered smoothly. That's wonderful. It must be powerful to share both personal and professional passion for such important work. The interview concluded moments later, but I knew as soon as the camera stopped rolling that I'd just changed the course of my life. My phone, silenced during the broadcast, was already buzzing incessantly in my bag. The production assistant approached as I gathered my things. There's someone asking for you in the lobby. Says she's your mother. My blood ran cold. My mother is here. The assistant nodded. She seemed pretty insistent on seeing you right away. Heart pounding, I made my way to the lobby, mentally rehearsing explanations, defenses, apologies. But nothing could have prepared me for the scene that awaited me. My mother stood rigidly in the center of the room, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. Her face was an alarming shade of red, her normally perfect composure completely shattered. Beside her stood my father, looking more alert and engaged than I'd seen him in years. Husband. My mother hissed the word as soon as she saw me. You said my husband on national television, Jessica. What kind of game are you playing? A few heads turned our way, and I noticed a receptionist watching with undisguised interest. Mom, Dad, I can explain, but not here, I said quietly, trying to guide them toward the exit. Explain? My mother's voice rose sharply. Explain how you've apparently gotten married without telling your family? Explain how you've been lying to our faces for how long exactly? Eleanor, let's take this somewhere private, my father said, placing a restraining hand on her arm. It was the first time I could remember him stepping in to moderate her behavior. 2 years, I said, the truth finally spilling out. I've been married for 2 years. My mother physically staggered, as if I'd struck her. 2 years? To whom? The lobby doors opened behind me, and I knew without turning who had arrived. Ryan had been waiting nearby to take me to a celebration lunch after the interview. Now he approached cautiously, placing a supportive hand at the small of my back. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, he said with remarkable composure. I think we have a lot to talk about. My mother's face went from red to white as recognition dawned. You? She married you. What followed was an excruciating 30 minutes in a small conference room the station manager hastily offered us. My mother alternated between icy silence and cutting accusations. My father mainly looked bewildered, occasionally asking practical questions about when and how the wedding had taken place. Ryan remained calm and dignified, despite my mother's increasingly personal attacks. So you've been living this lie, sneaking around behind our backs, making fools of us all, my mother finally demanded, her voice trembling. Do your brothers know? Has everyone been laughing at me behind my back? No one knows, Mom. And this wasn't about you. It was about protecting my relationship from this exact reaction. Protecting? You've humiliated this family. What will people think? That we weren't even worthy of attending our own daughter's wedding. Eleanor, my father interjected firmly. That's enough. All three of us turned to him in surprise. He rarely contradicted my mother, especially in public. Gregory, surely you can't be defending this deception. Our daughter felt she couldn't tell us about the most important relationship in her life, he said quietly. That should give us pause. My mother gaped at him, then gathered her composure and her purse. We'll discuss this at home, Jessica. Without him. She nodded dismissively toward Ryan. I expect you there tonight. We need to decide how to manage this, situation before the entire country is gossiping about our family. As she swept toward the door, my father hesitated, then unexpectedly extended his hand to Ryan. Congratulations are apparently long overdue, he said formally, before following my mother. When they left, I collapsed into Ryan's arms, emotions warring between relief that the secret was finally out and terror about what would happen next. Are you going? Ryan asked as we sat in a nearby cafe, trying to process the confrontation. I have to, I said, finally slipping my wedding ring onto my finger where it belonged. But not to manage the situation. It's time for some honest conversation. What I didn't realize then was that the public revelation of my marriage would trigger far more than just a family crisis. It would unearth long-buried secrets that would rock the very foundation of the Mitchell family facade, secrets that would make my hidden marriage seem trivial by comparison. Hey everyone, can you believe how this story is unfolding? I'm actually getting nervous just thinking about what happens next. If you're feeling the tension too, hit that like button and let me know in the comments if you've ever had to confront your family with a big truth they weren't ready to hear. I promise, what happens when I arrive at my parents' house that night will completely change everything you think you know about this story. Stay tuned for the rest, it only gets more intense from here. That evening, I drove to my parents' house alone, despite Ryan's concerns. You shouldn't face them by yourself, he'd argued, but I knew this confrontation needed to happen on Mitchell family turf first. I've been hiding for 2 years, I told him as I kissed him goodbye. I'm done hiding now. The drive to Connecticut gave me time to rehearse what I wanted to say, but nothing could have prepared me for what awaited me. As I pulled into the familiar circular driveway, I noticed extra cars. My brother's vehicles were there too. My mother had evidently summoned the entire family for this crisis. Taking a deep breath, I entered without knocking, the childhood home suddenly feeling foreign and intimidating. Voices drifted from the living room, tense, argumentative tones that ceased abruptly when I closed the front door. I walked in to find a tableau straight from a dysfunctional family drama, my mother perched rigidly on her favorite armchair, my father standing by the fireplace with an uncharacteristic scowl, James pacing by the windows, Michael slumped on the sofa, and both Charlotte and Isabel looking uncomfortably out of place on the love seat. Here she is, my mother announced coldly. The blushing bride. 2 years late to her own wedding announcement. Hello to you too, Mom, I said, remaining standing. I deliberately displayed my wedding ring, now proudly on my finger. James stopped pacing to stare at me. Is it true? You secretly married that environmental lawyer guy? The one Mom said wasn't good enough. His name is Ryan Cooper, I said firmly. And yes, I married him 2 years ago. He's brilliant, kind, and treats me with respect, which is more than I can say for how this family has treated either of us. How could you do this, Jessica? Charlotte interjected with wounded self-importance. We're family. Families share important life events. Do they, Charlotte? I turned to her. Like how you shared your genuine opinion about my career choices at Christmas last year? Called it my little writing hobby even though you knew it was a senior editor position. Charlotte flushed and looked away. You've made your point, Jessica, my mother said sharply. You felt excluded and retaliated with this secret ceremony. Now we need to focus on damage control. People will be asking questions after your television appearance. I laughed incredulously. Damage control? Mom, I didn't get married to spite you. I got married because I fell in love with an amazing man who you rejected based on nothing but classist prejudice. And I kept it secret because I knew you'd react exactly like this, making it all about appearances rather than my happiness. My father cleared his throat. Jessica, while I don't condone the deception, I think we need to acknowledge that your mother's strong opinions may have contributed to the situation. My mother whipped her head toward him. Gregory, whose side are you on? I wasn't aware we needed to take sides in our daughter's marriage, he replied evenly. Michael, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. I looked him up, Jess. Ryan Cooper. He won that huge class action against North Ken last year. Got a settlement for the families in that contaminated town. It was in all the legal journals. He sounded impressed, despite himself. Yes, I confirmed. The case in my story today was similar. He's making a real difference for people who need it. Well, isn't that special? My mother said dismissively. Playing hero for the unfortunate while deceiving his own family. Charming values. Something in me snapped. His family knows we're married, Mom. His mother attended our wedding. She welcomed me unconditionally, without judging my background or career or whether I fit some arbitrary social standard. A stunned silence followed this revelation. His mother knew. My mother's voice was dangerously quiet. Some stranger attended my daughter's wedding while I was kept in the dark. Diane Cooper isn't a stranger to me, I replied steadily. She's my mother-in-law, and she's shown me more maternal support in 2 years than you have in my entire adult life. How dare you? My mother shot to her feet. After everything we've given you, the education, the opportunities, the connections, the constant criticism, the conditional love, the undermining of every choice I made that didn't align with your narrow vision for my life, I countered, years of repressed frustration finally finding voice. You didn't want me to marry Ryan because he came from a working-class background, even though he graduated top of his class at Columbia Law. It was never about his character or how he treated me. I wanted better for you, she shouted, her composure finally cracking completely. Better than genuine love and respect. I challenged. Better than a partnership of equals? What exactly did you want from me, Mom? A marriage like yours and Dad's? Another heavy silence fell across the room. My father stiffened by the fireplace, his expression unreadable. What is that supposed to mean? My mother asked, her voice dangerously low. I hesitated, suddenly aware I'd stepped onto unstable ground. Just that. I wanted more than a marriage of convenience. I wanted real connection. My father abruptly set down his untouched drink with a sharp click against the mantel. Eleanor, perhaps it's time for some honesty all around. My mother's head snapped toward him, her expression suddenly alarmed. Gregory, this isn't the time. If not now, when? He interrupted with unexpected force. Our daughter has been living a double life because she feared our reaction, feared your reaction, specifically. What does that say about the family we've built? James stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Dad, let's focus on the issue at hand. Jessica got married without telling us, and now it's public knowledge. We need to present a united front. A united front. My father laughed humorlessly. That's always been the priority, hasn't it? Appearances above all else. My mother stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. Jessica, we'll discuss this tomorrow when tempers have cooled. For now, I think it's best if you leave. No. My father's authoritative tone shocked everyone. In my 35 years, I'd rarely heard him contradict my mother so directly. No more postponing difficult conversations. No more secrets and lies in this family. My mother turned pale. Gregory, please. Eleanor has been controlling this family through manipulation, guilt, and social pressure for decades, my father continued, addressing the room at large. I allowed it because it seemed easier than confrontation, and because I carried my own guilt. But looking at what it's done to our daughter, what it's done to all of us, I can't stay silent anymore. My brothers exchanged confused glances. Charlotte and Isabel looked like they wished they could disappear. What guilt, Dad? I asked quietly. He met my eyes directly for what felt like the first time in years. The guilt of staying in a loveless marriage long after I discovered your mother's affair with Richard Hamilton. The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. Richard Hamilton was my mother's best friend's husband, a prominent figure in our social circle. That's ancient history, my mother snapped, but her face had drained of all color. Is it? My father challenged. The affair ended 20 years ago when I confronted you, but we've been living this charade ever since. Presenting ourselves as the perfect couple, the perfect family, while growing more distant every year. And you've insisted our children follow the same path, marriages based on social suitability rather than genuine connection. I stared at my parents, pieces of my childhood suddenly rearranging into a new, clearer picture. The cold formality between them that I'd always attributed to old-fashioned reserve. The separate bedrooms explained away as different sleep schedules. The unspoken tension whenever the Hamiltons attended the same social functions. Is this true? James asked our mother, his voice shaking. She drew herself up with dignity. This is hardly an appropriate conversation to have in front of your children, my father finished for her. The ones you've been lecturing about proper behavior and family values for decades? The ones you've manipulated into life choices that matched your social aspirations rather than their actual desires. He turned to James. Did you really want to follow me into investment banking, or was that Eleanor's plan for you? James looked stricken, glancing between our parents with growing distress. My father continued relentlessly, decades of suppressed resentment finally breaking free. And you've spent years criticizing Jessica for her relationship with Ryan, calling him unsuitable, when the truth is he represents everything your affair partner wasn't: honest, committed, faithful. Stop it, my mother cried, tears finally spilling down her carefully made-up face. You have no right to air our private business like this. Like you aired Jessica's on national television today, my father countered. Showing up at her workplace, creating a scene? The difference is, she kept her marriage private because it was precious to her, not because it was shameful. I stood frozen, watching the foundation of my family crumble before my eyes. Part of me felt vindicated, the hypocritical standards I'd been measured against all my life suddenly exposed. But another part felt profound sadness for the years of pretense and pain. Dad, Michael said hesitantly, why stay together all this time if? Appearances, my father said simply. Your mother convinced me it was better for everyone, for you children, for our social standing, for our extended families. And I was a coward who found it easier to retreat into work than to demand better or leave. He looked at me. Until today, when I saw the courage it took for Jessica to finally live her truth, despite knowing the backlash she would face. My mother had collapsed back into her chair, all pretense of composure abandoned as she sobbed openly. The carefully maintained facade of Mitchell family perfection had shattered beyond repair. I think, I said quietly, that we all need some time to process this. I looked around at my shell-shocked siblings and their equally stunned partners. But I won't apologize for marrying Ryan. And I won't hide him or my life with him anymore. As I turned to leave, my father called after me. Jessica. I paused at the doorway. Bring him to dinner next week. I'd like to properly meet my son-in-law. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes, and walked out into the warm summer evening, feeling both broken and liberated. The truth had finally broken through, messy, painful, but ultimately necessary. What I didn't know then was that this explosive evening was just the beginning of a transformation that would redefine our entire family. The week following the dual revelations, my secret marriage and my parents' decades-long charade passed in a blur of tense phone calls, tearful conversations, and careful negotiations. The Mitchell family ecosystem, built on appearances and unspoken rules, had been fundamentally disrupted, and none of us knew exactly how to navigate the aftermath. Ryan was my anchor through it all, holding me when I cried, talking through my conflicted emotions, and never once saying "I told you so" about the secret we'd kept for too long. Families are complicated, he said one night as we sat on our rooftop terrace, the Brooklyn skyline glittering before us. There's no perfect way to handle this kind of situation. I just can't believe the hypocrisy, I said, still processing my father's revelation. All those years of judgment about my choices, my relationships, while she was the one who'd had an affair. People who judge the harshest often have the most to hide, Ryan observed. Your mother's criticism of others might have been her way of deflecting from her own mistakes. This perspective helped me approach the impending dinner with something resembling compassion rather than righteous anger. When Sunday arrived, Ryan and I drove to Connecticut together, the first time he'd been to my childhood home since that disastrous first meeting 7 years ago. Nervous? I asked as we pulled into the driveway. He squeezed my hand. A little. But I'm not the insecure law student I was back then. And more importantly, we're not hiding anymore. The dinner that followed was surreal in its awkwardness, but represented the first honest interaction our family had experienced in decades. My father made a genuine effort to get to know Ryan, asking thoughtful questions about his legal work and listening with actual interest to the answers. My mother was subdued but civil, her usual sharp edges dulled by the exposure of her own past actions. My brothers reacted differently to the new family dynamic. James seemed deeply shaken, questioning aspects of his own life choices in ways that clearly concerned Charlotte. Michael, surprisingly, appeared almost relieved by the disruption of the family mythology, confiding in me later that he'd been having doubts about his engagement to Isabel. I always thought something was wrong with me because I couldn't feel what I was supposed to feel, he admitted as we stood in the kitchen, ostensibly getting dessert. Watching you with Ryan tonight, there's something there that Isabel and I just don't have. It's not too late to make different choices, I told him gently. He nodded thoughtfully. Maybe this family needs fewer secrets and more truth all around. Over the following months, the Mitchell family began a painful but necessary evolution. My parents entered counseling, separately and together, confronting the decades of resentment and pretense that had poisoned their relationship. Whether they would stay together remained uncertain, but for the first time, they were addressing reality instead of maintaining appearances. James and Charlotte struggled the most with the new paradigm. They'd built their lives most closely following my mother's blueprint for success, and seeing that blueprint questioned left them floundering. Their marriage hit a rough patch as James began asking himself uncomfortable questions about his career choices and personal values. Michael made the most dramatic change, breaking off his engagement to Isabel after realizing they were compatible on paper but lacked genuine connection. It caused a minor social scandal in my mother's circle, but seemed to liberate something in my youngest brother. He eventually switched careers, leaving consulting to teach art history at a local college, returning to the passion he'd abandoned years ago. As for Ryan and me, we experienced a different kind of adjustment. After years of compartmentalizing our relationship, integrating our married life with my family connections required constant navigation. We hosted a small reception in our Brooklyn home for friends and family who hadn't been at our original wedding, finally celebrating our union openly. Ryan's mother Diane became an unexpected bridge builder, reaching out to my mother with remarkable grace despite knowing how she'd initially rejected her son. Life's too short to hold grudges, she told me when I expressed surprise at her willingness to extend an olive branch. And families need all the healing they can get. Professionally, the exposure of my marriage ironically boosted my career. The story of an investigative journalist married to an environmental attorney brought attention to our work from major media outlets. Ryan and I were careful to maintain appropriate ethical boundaries, but no longer had to hide our connection. We even collaborated on a series of community forums about environmental justice issues, combining our different professional perspectives. 6 months after the confrontation at my parents' house, I found myself sitting in my father's study during a visit home. He'd asked to speak with me privately, and I'd entered the wood-paneled room with some trepidation. "I owe you an apology," he began, looking older and wearier than I remembered, but somehow more present. "Not just for the scene at the TV studio, but for years of standing by while your mother undermined your choices and happiness." "Why did you let it happen, Dad?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for months. He sighed heavily. "After I discovered her affair, something broke in me. I retreated into work, into emotional distance. It seemed easier than confronting the collapse of the life we'd built. But that distance affected everyone, especially you children." He looked at me directly. "I failed you as a father, Jessica. I'm trying to do better now, even if it's late." "It's never too late for honesty," I said, echoing what Ryan had told me so many times. My father nodded, then reached into his desk drawer. "I have something for you and Ryan." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a deed to a small cottage on the Maine coast. It was my grandparents' summer home. I've had it maintained, but haven't used it in years. I thought you two might enjoy it, a place for weekends, holidays, maybe someday for your own family. I was speechless, recognizing this for the profound gesture. It was not just a valuable property, but an acknowledgement of my marriage and a place in the family future. "Thank you," I managed finally. "This means a lot." "Your happiness means a lot," he replied simply. It took me too long to remember that. As autumn turned to winter, our first holiday season as an openly acknowledged couple brought new challenges and unexpected joys. We split our time between Ryan's mother's warm, chaotic celebration and a more subdued gathering at my parents' house. The contrast was stark but illuminating. What surprised me most was watching my mother gradually, awkwardly attempt to adapt. She would never be the warm, emotionally expressive person that Diane was, but she made visible efforts to accept Ryan and respect our relationship. Small gestures, asking his opinion on current events, remembering details about his cases, even once defending his career choice when a family friend made a dismissive comment about activist lawyers. "He's actually making a difference in people's lives," she'd said with uncharacteristic sharpness. How many of us can truly say the same? The road to family healing wasn't smooth or straight. There were setbacks, arguments, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves. But beneath the surface, a fundamental shift had occurred. The exposure of long-held secrets had created space for something new to grow, something still imperfect, still evolving, but rooted in truth rather than appearance. As Ryan and I drove back to Brooklyn after one particularly exhausting family weekend, he asked, "Do you regret it?" The way everything came out. I considered the question carefully, watching winter landscapes pass outside the car window. "No," I said finally. "I regret the years of hiding, the time wasted pretending to be someone I wasn't." But the truth needed to come out, all of it, for anything to change. He reached for my hand across the console. From secrets to honesty. Not a bad journey in the end. Not a bad journey at all, I thought, as we headed home together. The Mitchell family would never be a Hallmark card image of perfection, but perhaps we were finally becoming something more valuable, authentic. 1 year after my secret marriage became public, I stood in the kitchen of our Brooklyn brownstone, preparing for a gathering that would have been unimaginable 12 months earlier. The entire Mitchell and Cooper families coming together to celebrate our 3rd wedding anniversary. "Need any help?" Ryan appeared in the doorway, looking handsome in a casual button-down shirt, his hair slightly damp from the shower. "Just nerves," I admitted, arranging cheese on a serving board. "I still can't quite believe everyone agreed to come." He wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "A year of family therapy works wonders, apparently." I laughed, leaning back against him. "That and my mother finally meeting her match in your mother." It was true. The unlikely friendship that had developed between Eleanor Mitchell and Diane Cooper had surprised everyone, most of all me. Their personalities couldn't have been more different. My mother with her polished reserve and focus on propriety, Diane with her warm directness and practical wisdom. Yet somehow, over tentative lunches and cautious phone calls, they'd found common ground as mothers-in-law determined to support their children's marriage. The doorbell rang, signaling our first guests had arrived. I took a deep breath, smoothing my hands over my dress, a simple emerald green that I'd chosen because Ryan loved the color on me, not because it adhered to my mother's idea of appropriate attire. Another small but meaningful change. The gathering unfolded with a surprising ease. My father, who had separated from my mother 6 months earlier but maintained an amicable relationship with her, arrived with a vintage bottle of champagne and a relaxed demeanor I couldn't remember seeing before. Retirement from investment banking had transformed him, allowing him to pursue long-abandoned interests in sailing and landscape photography. My mother entered with characteristic precision, elegantly dressed and bearing perfectly wrapped gifts. But the rigid formality that had once defined her had softened somewhat. The exposure of her decades-old affair and the subsequent family reckoning had forced her to confront her own hypocrisy. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been weeks of angry silence, tearful recriminations, and stubborn resistance, but gradually, therapy and the realization that she might lose her family entirely had prompted genuine change. "Jessica, darling," she greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that felt warmer than her usual air kiss. "The place looks lovely. You've done wonders with the original moldings." Coming from my interior design-obsessed mother, this was high praise indeed. My brothers arrived with their own stories of transformation. James and Charlotte had separated briefly but reconciled after hard conversations about what they truly wanted from their marriage. They'd made significant changes, including James stepping back from his punishing work schedule to be more present with their children. Michael arrived with Alicia, a curator he'd met through his new position teaching art history, a relationship my mother would once have disapproved of for its lack of strategic social advantage. Instead, I'd overheard her telling a friend how refreshingly intelligent Michael's new girlfriend was. Ryan's family completed our circle, his warm, practical mother Diane, his uncle Thomas and Aunt Ruth who had become like second parents to me, his cousins with their boisterous energy so different from the restrained Mitchell gatherings of my childhood. As we all gathered around our dining table, glasses raised for a toast, I felt a wave of emotion seeing these two families, once so separated by secrets and social barriers, sharing space, conversation, and genuine laughter. Ryan squeezed my hand under the table. "Want to tell them?" he whispered. I nodded, my heart full. We'd been waiting for this moment when everyone we loved was together. Ryan stood, drawing everyone's attention. "Jessica and I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate not just our anniversary, but the journey all of us have taken this past year." He looked around the table, his expression sincere. Family isn't always easy, but it's worth fighting for, worth being honest about. I stood beside him, gathering my courage. "We have some news to share." I paused, feeling the weight of the moment. "In about 6 months, we'll be welcoming a new member to our families. We're having a baby." The room erupted in exclamations and congratulations. Diane wiped tears openly while my mother pressed a hand to her mouth, her composure briefly overcome. My father raised his glass again. To new beginnings and to the truth that set them free. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to depart, I found myself alone in the kitchen with my mother. She was carefully wrapping leftover dessert, her movements precise as always. "I never properly apologized to you," she said suddenly, not looking up from her task. "For how I treated Ryan when you first brought him home. For making you feel you needed to hide your happiness." I leaned against the counter, watching her. "A lot has changed in a year." "Because you forced it to," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "Your father was right that night. You had the courage to live your truth despite knowing what it would cost." "I never had that courage." "It's never too late to start," I said softly. She nodded, her expression vulnerable in a way I rarely saw. "When your baby comes, I'd like to be a grandmother who supports rather than criticizes. Who sees the child for who they are, not who I think they should be." She hesitated. "I may need some guidance in that." "We all need guidance sometimes," I replied, thinking of the family counseling sessions that had been alternately excruciating and healing. That's what family is for, when it's working right. After everyone had gone and Ryan and I were cleaning up the last glasses, he pulled me into a dance in our living room, no music playing except the distant sounds of the city. "Happy?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. I thought about the long, complicated journey that had brought us here. The pain of hiding, the shock of exposure, the difficult healing that followed. I thought about the family we were creating, not just the baby growing inside me, but the blended, imperfect, authentic extended family we'd fought to build. "Yes," I said simply. Not because everything's perfect, but because it's real. And that, in the end, was the most valuable lesson from our story, that perfect appearances built on secrets and judgment ultimately crumble, but relationships founded on honesty and acceptance, however messy and challenging, have the strength to endure and grow. My mother's thoughtless comment at that family dinner a year ago, "No wonder you're still single at 35, had accidentally triggered the unraveling of decades of family pretense. My secret wedding had been just the beginning of the truth that needed to emerge. In the pain and reconciliation that followed, all of us had found something more valuable than the social approval my mother had pursued so relentlessly, the freedom to be authentically ourselves and to be loved not despite but because of it. As I laid my head on Ryan's shoulder, feeling our baby's first fluttering movements between us, I knew that this honest, imperfect, real connection was worth every difficult step of the journey. Hey everyone, that's the end of my story, and wow, it's been quite a journey sharing it with you all. I'm curious, have any of you experienced family secrets or moments where telling your truth completely changed your family dynamics? Let me know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, Please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about family relationships, personal growth, and finding authentic happiness. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that living your truth, while sometimes painful, ultimately leads to deeper and more genuine connections. Thank you so much for listening to my family revenge story, where karma finally caught up with everyone, including me, in the most unexpected ways. I'll see you in the next video.